In this small provincial estate in the middle of nowhere, a child was born. The maid announced that a boy had been born and the gods had given them a blessing. The woman decided to name her baby Ruin Ardell. Since childhood, the boy did not stand out in any way. One day the boy overheard his father talking with a friend about seafood. He called Uncle Baggins and asked him not to go outside by the southern mountain because there was a strange flow of manna there. Uncle wondered what this could mean, but father just shrugged. A little later, Baggins was already returning home after his journey. He asked the owner for forgiveness and said that he had chosen the longer route because he had managed to avoid trouble thanks to the boy. The man did not cross the street near the southern mountain, but now he learned that there was an attack by beastmen there. Everyone who was there was in danger, but thanks to the young master, he was not among them, and the child's father thought about it. The uncle suggested that the boy could sense manna floating in the air, but it was still difficult for the father to say whether this was true. From that day on, the boy increasingly showed a talent for magic. At 6 years old, he felt manna, and at 7, he could already manifest it. And when he turned 10, the floor was given to a representative of the first years. The hero surpassed other children from prestigious families entering the Ignite Magic Academy and was accepted as the top applicant, and also received the title of genius. This attitude weighed somewhat on him, but he consoled himself with the thought that his name would raise the status of the family. However, it could not be said that he succeeded in this, since on the very first day of classes it became clear that he was far from the best, and not even the second. The hero lacked the innate ability to release magic even a meter away from his body. For a magician, his body was literally the worst. It didn't take long for others to learn of his humble origins and lack of talent for magic, so their attitude quickly changed. One student brushed his shoulder while passing by in the hallway and said to another that since he had touched a disabled person, he could become like that too. They called him a man who was unable to use magic, a defective man who was not even able to cast spells at the Magic Academy. One of the students noticed the hero looking at him and swung his fist to hit him. After this incident, Ruin was very upset. He didn't know if he could become a magician at all. A person who entered the academy with the best grades is more promising than anyone else, and more diligent than anyone else. But because of this curse, the genius became disabled in terms of magic, and that's how it all ended. More precisely, he thought that everything was over. I couldn't even imagine that in the depths of despair there would be room for a miracle. The hero found himself somewhere in space. The status window was unlocked, and the player's artifact was activated. Ruin didn't understand where he was. It felt like he was deep underwater. Suddenly, a giant image appeared before him, which explained that the young man was the incarnation of Drak, the destroyer of worlds. The hero realized that everything happening around him was too vivid for sleep. A few hours earlier, students had gathered at the Ignite Academy training grounds. Professor of Combat Magic Heidel asked Ruin to create a fireball and hit the scarecrow with it. Fireball is a magic that any academy student should be able to handle with ease. But for someone who is unable to use magic, this is an almost impossible task. Ruin concentrated the fire energy in his hand. He sincerely hoped that everything would work out for him. The kids in the class started whispering. They noticed the size of his ball and didn't understand whether a person could have such a quantity of mana. But the hero coughed and realized that he could not do anything further. His magic could not break away from his body. The teacher shouted for Ruin to release him quickly, but the hero explained that the fireball did not leave his hand. The teacher explained to Ruin that he was already in his senior year, and if he still couldn't handle simple magic, he wouldn't pass the exam. In the practical test of the exam, students had to create 10 fireballs and hit a target multiple times. Ruin was unable to charge even one orb, and all the students talked about how incompetent and useless he was. Because the best applicant was the son of a provincial nobleman, his peers from more prestigious families became envious. A hopeless reality began to destroy the hero from within. His curse was the only thing that held him back for all 6 years. And although he had held up well all this time, now he couldn't help but wonder how much longer he could hold out. Ruin walked into the academy corridor, where other academy students had already gathered. One of the students, a fair-haired guy, approached the hero and advised him to pack his bags, since he would never hand in anything. He said that because of the guy, the senior class is not a role model. The white-haired man's friend explained that since nature had not endowed him with skills, he had to at least be rich. But even here, Ruin found himself at a loss. The blonde agreed with his comrade and said that his father said that the hero's family only behaves arrogantly, although they have nothing. All this talk about family made the guy so angry that he turned around and hit the blonde in the face with his fist as hard as he could. He ordered him to repeat what he had just said about his father, his face contorted with anger. The blonde held his bloody nose and couldn't believe how Ruin dared to touch him. The blonde's partner jumped and was about to strike the hero with all his might. But Ruin got ahead of him and punched the guy in the stomach, taking his breath away. The next moment something happened that no one expected. The blonde stood up and gathered all the electrical energy in his hands. He didn't care that he could be expelled for using magic within the school walls, and he launched the entire ball of energy at Ruin. At that moment, the professor ran into the corridor and asked to stop everything that was happening, but he didn't have time. A huge wave of electrical energy overtook the hero and swallowed him completely. Just as the hero thought, his end came. But he found himself in space in front of a huge creature. Before Ruin had time to ask the necessary questions, some voice began calling him by name. The guy opened his eyes and saw the high-class healer Helen. He tried to sit up in bed and asked where he was now. The girl explained to him that he was in the restroom. Ruin grabbed his head. He felt a little dizzy, but he was able to sit up. It felt as if he had lost consciousness before. He still didn't understand that it was in space. The vision seemed so real. Helen explained that they needed to run some tests, as he looked pretty good for someone who had been hit directly by a lightning ball. The hero tensed up. He had no wounds, no burns, and even his organs were intact. The healer had never encountered anything like this before. The lightning ball was a terrible magic that burned the body in seconds, but he took a direct hit and did not understand why he remained completely fine. Helen explained to him that the professor would be coming in now, and she would need to go analyze the results. When the teacher entered, he was also extremely surprised and told how a professorial council had been called about this incident. He said that first of all, they decided that Ben Folt would be expelled, because the use of combat magic, especially in a school with the intent to kill, is unacceptable. The hero lowered his head and admitted that he had also hit Ben, for which the professor ordered him to do volunteer service for a month. The teacher also asked Ruin if he had any artifact that helped him survive, and the boy admitted that he didn't have one. The teacher told how before the boy was struck by lightning, his body was surrounded by a red light, as if he was being protected by a high-ranking artifact. Ruin explained that he didn't know what happened then, but he definitely didn't have any artifact. The hero really had no idea what had happened, and the professor did not ask further questions. He thought about it, because there was also an experience that was indistinguishable from a dream, and that strange voice talking about Drac the Destroyer of Worlds. Suddenly, a blue screen appeared in front of the hero, and the hero even screamed out of surprise. Helen ran into his room and asked what had happened, and the hero asked her if she saw anything in front of him. The girl looked at him with concern and explained that there was nothing in front of him, which meant she had not seen this screen. Ruin lied that he had simply imagined it, and Helen replied that he had chosen a bad moment for the joke. She announced that his tests were also normal, which meant he could return to his dorm. As the hero walked to the dorm, he remembered how it was written in that window that he was the incarnation of Drac. And I didn't know if it was possible that Drac's artifact was somehow transferred to him. And right now, on the street in front of the hero, another strange window with some kind of task appeared. The assignment said that he had to punch and kick 100 times, and this was related to physical strength. He began to perform lunges with his fists, and with each blow the progress of the quest was protected. However, one of the strikes did not count, and the hero believed that progress was not protected if the slightest mistake was made. After some time, when all the exercises were completed, the hero sighed with relief. His task was completed, and he received a reward of 10 strength. As soon as the reward was received, he felt a new feeling circulating subtly in his blood. The hero felt like he became much stronger after that. The power entering the magic became much more powerful. The speed of air resistance and destructive power felt completely different. At one point, the screen also explained that the hero's mana would now be replaced by physical strength. All who feel and study mana have a circle around their heart. The mana circle plays an important role in both strengthening and releasing mana. The hero had 4 circles of mana, more than was common for people his age, but due to his disorder, it was as good as 0. But this time, his mana circles have completely dried up, and the madly circulating force instead is power circles. The hero didn't know about magicians without mana circles. He didn't know what would happen to him if these new circles didn't become a full-fledged replacement. He decided that it was too early to give in to panic. He first needed to test the circles in action. In the blink of an eye, he concentrated a fireball in his hand as soon as he thought of it. Seeing the size of his fireball, Ruin realized that he had been given a unique chance. Since the magic had a basic principle of operation, it took an average of 10 seconds to release. But the ability to skip this step and create a fireball using one's own internal power was definitely the power of the artifact. The hero wondered if it was possible that Draca suffered from a similar disorder to him, and fought by infusing his fists and legs with magic. Ruin tried to attack the scarecrow that was standing nearby with a fireball, and it flew into pieces. When the task was finally completed, the boy fell tiredly to the ground and stretched out. He had every failure in the discharge stage before, but he finally overcame it. The hero wondered how it was possible to come up with such a method, and what kind of person this Draco was. The boy didn't notice how he fell asleep, and woke up only from the blinding sun and the screams of the students. They crowded around him and asked worriedly if he was dead. It was strange to them that he was lying on the ground. Ruin stretched sweetly and asked in confusion why they were looking at him like that, as if they were seeing a person sleeping on the street for the first time. They admitted that they were seeing something like this for the first time, and they were also curious whether he had been drinking. The hero waved it off and explained that he was simply so exhausted that he fell asleep on the spot. The boys noticed the scraps on the ground and decided that Ruin had left them, but quickly dismissed the thought because he was weak. As soon as the hero entered the room, he saw Jason Damon brushing his teeth. He was surprised that the guy returned in the morning. He was the eldest son of the Damon family, famous for their foundry and metal mining, and he was at least not hostile to the hero. Although he was a psycho, obsessed with alcohol and girls, which is why he constantly left the academy grounds. He wondered what Ruin had been up to last night, but he threw his shirt in his face and wandered off to the bathroom. There, the hero immediately felt better. He remembered that there was an additional task in which the exercises increased in number, but the reward remained the same. Ruin thought that the number of exercises would continue to double. As expected, it would not be easy. The repetitive task could be performed once a day, but in contrast to the constant reward, the number of repetitions required increased from day to day. If the task could not be completed within a day, all progress was reset. Therefore, the hero did not miss training. The only advantage was that the requirements for completing the task did not rise above 3,000 repetitions. Over the past month, the hero has been going through these training sessions every day, and even acquired a new body art skill. Everyone around began to notice that Ruin had been acting strangely lately. He began to sleep during lectures instead of listening. The hero himself has been completing tasks over the past month and looking for any clues about the identity of the dragon. But I couldn't find any magicians with that name in historical records. The same thing happened with the World Destroyer, the player, the status window, and the quests. I couldn't learn anything from the books. While searching, Jason came up to the guy and asked if he was aware of the latest events or not. He informed the hero that his father had arrived at the academy. The boy ran into the hall of the academy and saw his father talking to the professor. A little later, they were already talking in the living room. Ruin asked how his father had been doing all these 6 years. Everything was fine with him. The father said that the hero's younger sister had become quite an adult and was now studying the art of swordsmanship. He said that she wanted to protect her weak older brother, and the hero felt awkward from these words. The father also told Ruin that the doors of the house were always open to him, and if things got too difficult, his son could always come back. But the hero said that he was now preparing for exams, and only if he failed them, his father would be able to do as he knew. The boy promised his father that he would get good results on the exam. The father realized his determination, and after the conversation returned to the estate. Finally, the day of the written exam on understanding magic arrived. Any violation was punishable by having the result nullified. The hero began to write with concentration. The exam itself was divided into written and practical parts. The practical part was divided into 4 more: aimed shooting, measuring magical power, real combat, and one-on-one combat. As the owner of the disorder, the hero passed the written part perfectly. But in the practical part, Mikkel always took first place. However, this time, everything was going to be different, because Ruin was confident that he would be the one to take first place this year. Once the written part was completed and several days of preparation had passed, it was time for the practical exam. When all the students had already gathered, Jason approached the hero and asked if he had any plan for the practical exam. Before the hero could answer, Mikkel and his comrades approached them, surprised that the guy was going to take part. He put his hand on Ruin's shoulder and explained that instead of going out and subjecting himself to humiliation, he could just give in. But the hero in turn said that Mikkel's advice would not be useful. Blondel clenched his teeth. He thought that Ruin had never behaved so boldly before and did not understand where this self-confidence came from. The first part of the practical exam was aimed shooting at several targets. His goal was simple. It was necessary to find out how many targets the future magician could hit at one time. However, this year, the difficulty was increased as the targets were now constantly moving. Because of this, the average performance of the magicians was simply terrible. Examiners wondered how the results could have dropped so much due to such a small change. Professor Ellick at this point shouted out that it was the turn of Mikkel, who was his nephew. The self-confident young man walked up to the targets and prepared a projectile of energy in his hand. After hitting the targets, the students shouted with delight that this was to be expected from Mikkel. He hit so many targets at once. Ellick turned to his colleagues and suggested that his nephew was the pride of the academy and would certainly be this year's representative at the big festival. The elder did not answer. He said that this time was enough to assess the level of the current students. But the professor stopped the head of Tyrion. He explained that Ruin should speak next. The leader didn't think that he was still attending the academy, and the young man stood in front of the targets and prepared to test his strength. In the blink of an eye, he ignited a wild energy around him. Even Ellick was surprised by his ridiculously fast summoning speed, and the blonde smiled at this time and explained that Ruin had a disorder in releasing magic, so he still wouldn't be able to cope. The hero recently received the skill of time refraction, which helped him move abnormally fast for 30 seconds. In other words, the hero was now like a raging typhoon. The examiners looked at what was happening near the targets in surprise. When the stage was completed, one of the examiners summed up that Ruin had destroyed 27 targets. The students began to whisper in surprise. This was the highest result in the entire history of the academy. The head even stood up from his seat and applauded the young student. The other students also shouted their congratulations and clapped enthusiastically. Mikkel was angry at this time and did not understand how Ruin could do this because before he could not even release energy. The universal applause and recognition that the hero had not received even once in 6 years spread warmly through his chest. He smiled contentedly because he always wanted to feel it for himself. Ellis began to be outraged that Ruin used magic on his hands. He thought that this technique had nothing to do with magic. But the professor interrupted him and explained that the distinctive feature of magic is its limitless possibilities. The leader admitted that today he saw a miracle created by the student, a flawless magical miracle. At this time, in the corridor, Jason pounced on Ruin and shouted that the Archmage was coming. The other students were trying to figure out how he pulled off the trick on yesterday's exam. The hero realized that until yesterday he was an outcast. Everything changed literally overnight, so it was still difficult to get used to it. When Ruin reached the room, he was met by Mikkel, who explained that the hero's impudence irritated him and decided to warn him not to come out. He grabbed Ruin by the collar after the hero explained that it was all about Mikkel's confusion over losing. The hero squeezed the guy's hand hard and pulled it away from him. He offered Mikkel to test his strength in a one-on-one fight, if he so desired. The guy turned around and walked away from the room. He thought that the hero would definitely fail at today's stage. The second stage of the practical exam was the measurement of magical power. The ogre Kingren, locked in the artifact, absorbed the mana of the magicians. The students had to direct their magic at him and get a high result. The hero explained to Jason that he only needed to target the statue and use the spell he was most confident in. But this ogre was famous for evaluating very harshly. Getting a result higher than 20 from him was already considered something commendable. Many did not even score higher than 2 points. Mikkel was the next to take on the challenge, directing his mana flow and attack straight at the ogre. The ogre smiled, not forgetting to insult the boy's family, and finally gave him 27 points. Next, Ruin stood before the ogre, concentrating all his energy in his hands. The students didn't understand how it was possible that he had at least 4th grade magic. At that moment, the hero jumped up and directed all his energy into a blow at the ogre. The examiner watched this with a surprised expression and thought that it was impossible. Ruin moved the magic from his fist to his leg and detonated. There were whispers around that the Ruin was at least a 5th-class mage, and the hero thought that his spell had worked as it should. But Kingram's face was strange. The ogre looked closely at Ruin and asked him who he was. The hero began to introduce himself, but the ogre interrupted him and asked him if he was Draka by any chance, at which point the guy went into shock. Kingram greeted him and explained that he had been waiting for him for a long time, still addressing him by another name. The students watched this whole scene and did not understand what the ogre was talking about. They thought that he had confused Ruin with someone else. Over the past 2 months, the hero has read all the available books but could not find any mention of Drak, but Kingram had the information. Ruin asked the ogre who Drak was, and he, in turn, was surprised that he did not expect to meet his incarnation at the academy. The ogre was about to leave without saying anything more, but the examiner demanded that he name the scores. He explained that according to the rules, Kingram must evaluate students under contract. Thus, After some time, a rumor was already circulating among the students that the legendary ogre had given a score of 100 points to one of the students. In the confusion, Professor Heidel approached the hero and told him that rumors that he had earned 100 points had reached the head, and he wanted to present him with an award. He handed Ruin a scroll that described the artifact room and asked him to follow him. The professor took him to the only place in the academy where entry was prohibited. They went down the stairs and stopped at the artifact room. The professor couldn't go any further. The hero didn't know what was going on, but since it was his reward, he decided to go in and take a look. The artifact room was quite dark, but there were a lot of ancient things there. Suddenly, a voice was heard saying that the hero looked confused, as if he did not realize his own worth. Kingram asked Ruin if he was surprised that he wasn't in front of the statue, because that was the only place he could be himself. The ogre explained that the hero does not understand his importance despite the fact that he uses the same artifact as the player. He said that this rare artifact was one of a kind, and he was curious about how Ruin got it. The guy admitted that he himself did not understand this, which is why he wanted to know who Draco was. Kingram revealed that Draco was a being who wanted to become God. One day he came to the Sky Peak tribe, which the ogre belonged to. He was short and small, which looked unsightly. However, his strength was so monstrous that no one from the tribe could resist it. Even several ogres could not defeat him. They respected him. He lived with the ogres and was part of their tribe. He taught Kingram, the next chieftain of the tribe, language and magic for nearly 100 years. The hero was surprised how a person could live for 100 years, and Kingram answered him that Draco was not a person. His true form was the black dragon Dracogonia. The hero was shocked. It was incredible to him that dragons actually existed. The ogre revealed that Draco had found a way to fight like a hero by infusing his arms and legs with magic. Draco created an ability that only he could use. With her help, he became the most powerful being in the world. But in the end, he did not rest until he destroyed everything around him and himself. The hero realized that this was why he was called the Destroyer of Worlds. He could not even imagine how strong Draco was. Suddenly, a screen appeared in front of the hero and he thought a reward for communication was available to him. The hero received a sphere in his hands, which was called Strand. The ogre suggested that Ruin must have received a reward for the task. Draco had a habit of chatting about such things while staring into space. The hero showed the sphere to the ogre, who confirmed that the ball was Strand. He explained that Strand was always around Draco, so he couldn't help but recognize him. Strand was the embodiment of power. Although he was called a spirit, he was different from ordinary spirits. He had a nasty character and asked for food. Suddenly, the sphere in the hero's hands began to crack, and Kingram explained that the spirit would soon awaken. The next moment, a small bear appeared in Ruin's palms, sleepily rubbing his eyes with his paws and indignant at being called that. The hero called him a bear again, and the little beast bared his teeth and claws. Ruin asked the animal if he was not a bear, then what was he? The bear said that he is an embodiment not bound to form and can be whatever he wants. He tried to transform himself, but was frightened to realize that all his strength had disappeared somewhere. The beast guessed that this was all because he had been reincarnated with an empty stomach and was now asking for food. When the hero admitted that he didn't even know what to feed the bear lay down on his palm, offended, and fell asleep. The ogre laughed at this time. He said that thousands of years had passed, but the character of Strana remained the same. He explained that looking at Ruin with the country reminded him of the good old days. They reminded Kingram of Strana and Drac, whom he had encountered in his homeland among the Sky Peak tribe. The ogre wondered what Ruin would do next with the power that was now making him stronger. The hero thought that this was a desire to protect his people from demons, and also to elevate the Ardell family name and properly declare himself to those who despised him. Ruin explained that he would live by his own will, for the sake of his people, Sembi and himself. Kingram smiled. He promised to wait for the future that our hero would bring. Even though Ruin had gotten a clue about Drac's identity from the ogre, his daily routine hadn't changed at all. He went outside and woke up the bear. The only thing added to the whole routine was feeding Strana. The baby ate a lot. The food in question was the power the hero received from the quests. Strand fed on his power, and the skill of the country companion accelerated its development along with the development of the bear. The hero received an additional 100 strength each time the bear became stronger. Drac had 3,100 strength, and the hero didn't even have 1,000 yet, but he already felt very strong. Ruin wanted to know if there was a way to build strength other than through quests, and the bear promised to tell him if he gave him a glass of water. The hero made an evil face and suggested that the bear not say anything if he wanted to die of hunger. Then the beast said that you can take on tasks of increased difficulty. The more difficult the task, the better the reward. Strength is also given when creating items or finding an artifact. You could also boil the ogre's tendon and make an elixir. The bear said that all these options were not for Ruin, because first he needed to gain 1,000 strength. The hero thought all this time that he had become stronger, but in fact he was only at the beginning of his journey. He trained every day to increase his physical strength, and when she reached the mark of 930, the third stage of the exam began, the real fight, to which the hero came. This test was designed to test how well the mages managed risks, and this stage was the most important of all. The Knights of Foldren were called in to assist with the exam to ensure the safety of the students and to check their compatibility. The test lasted 10 days, and depending on the points they received, the students were given different monsters. And since today was already the last day of the test, everyone was interested in what kind of monster would appear before them. There were also orcs, who usually lived in groups. They were much larger than people and had intellectual abilities. The students were shocked. They didn't know if it was right to fight them as part of the exam. The professor addressed them and urged them to keep a cool head and consider this a real fight in order to give it their all. One of the speakers was Mikkel with his ice arrow, but the orc jumped and attacked him from above, jumping over the knights. Mikkel froze in a stupor, unable to move. A little more and the orc would have hit his head. But the professor came to his senses in time and summoned a tree prison with his own powers to grab the monster in bonds. The orc tried his best to break free from the bonds and growled menacingly. With his free hand, he was still trying to reach Mikkel, who had fallen to the floor and was still unable to move from fear. They explained to him that he was out, and Alec was beside himself with rage. He decided to stop the Ruin and turned to the head. He suggested to the old man to strengthen the monster for Ruin, since his number of points was much higher than the others. For this version, an orc was chosen, which was brought along with the ogres. Using an ogre in the test was very dangerous, but the leader decided to watch anyway because the professor and knights were nearby to ensure safety. Professor Heidel approached Ruin before the battle began and explained that today his test would be more difficult than the others. He said that the Academy expects a lot from the hero, because Kingram gave him the highest rating. When Ruin was told that he would be fighting an ogre, even Strand was surprised. Ogres were similar in appearance to orcs, but they were physically much stronger and could break a skull or displace bones with one blow. The knight asked the professor if they were sure that the ogre had to be placed, but the professor said that it was the chief's order. The knight saw the young man and did not understand how he would fight the giant. Besides, he passed by him. The guy explained that he would fight from the front lines, since his spells were different from the usual ones. The knight tried to object, but to no avail. He felt no fear from him at all. When the start of the test was announced, the ogre rushed with all his might at the soldiers and the hero. Ruin didn't think long and rushed through the soldiers straight to the monster. The knight only had time to scream in confusion about what this guy was doing, but the hero had already struck the ogre's fist with all his furious force. Dust rose around them. Everyone was surprised that the student himself went on the attack, and no one knew if he was alive. But the next moment Ruin appeared from the dust, and the knight put his hand on his shoulder, explaining that he needed to communicate his intentions. The hero explained that if he had told the knight about his plans from the very beginning, he would have opposed them. The knight made no reply and asked him to step back and let them finish what they had started. But Ruin resisted. He explained that this was his test, and he himself had to pass it. The hero didn't know how it happened, but in front of him stood an ogre 5 times larger than him. He understood what the ogre was screaming about. The monster was scared and asking the man to free him. A screen with a task popped up in front of the hero, in which he had to hit the ogre and defeat him. The reward was very valuable, and the hero smiled. The next moment, the monster jumped high and planned to land right on Ruin. But he deftly jumped back and the ogre hit the floor with his fists. The guy used one of his time refraction skills and started running. He moved close to the ogre and struck him in the vulnerable spot with a loaded fist. Ratsuri couldn't understand who this guy was who didn't even flinch against the ogre. The hero and the monster clashed their fists as if in an equal fight. At some point, the ogre grabbed Ruin by the leg and threw him far away from himself. But the guy landed on his feet and, what's more, jumped back towards the monster. He punched him with as much force as he could muster. When the ogre flew back a few meters, Ruin landed on his chest, pinning the monster to the ground. He squeezed all the energy into his fist, and then the monster realized that the hero understood him. At that very moment, the guy threw his fist into the ogre's jaw. Strand was surprised. He didn't expect that his new master would be much better than he expected. At this moment, excited cries were heard among the students praising Ruin. Alec looked angrily at the battlefield, and it dawned on him that the hero had won. The knights and the professor had already crowded around the ogre. The knights were shocked by how Ruin dealt with him single-handedly. One of them approached the guy and asked who taught him to fight like that, but he replied that no one. The hero asked the professor to announce the results of the exam. The professor explained that he didn't even think that the hero would be able to defeat him, but he didn't even give him a chance to intervene. Ruin realized that he had passed the test and received the player's eye as a reward. The bear explained to him that this meant that the hero had now become a real player. He said that with the help of the eye, he will now be able to see the real strength of people and all sorts of secrets. The hero also had a mini-map unlocked, which allowed him to see everything within a radius of 500 meters. The bear offered to look at the defeated ogre using the player's eye. But Ruin wanted to check Professor Heidel, but he couldn't read the information about him. The bear explained to the hero that he could not see information about someone stronger than him. As your power increases, the amount of information you can view should increase. After the real combat test was completed, rumors of Ruin defeating the ogre spread throughout the academy. Jason and Ruin sat on a bench in the academy's garden, Jason wondering if his friend was used to this kind of attention. At that moment, Ruin was called out by an unfamiliar, beautiful girl. She and the other girls praised him for passing the third stage of the exam and handed him a bag with breakfast. When the girls left, Ruin handed Jason the bag and offered him a snack. But he started lecturing her about how disrespectful it was to act that way towards a girl who was trying. The hero, looking at his comrade with the help of the player's eye, saw that he had high potential. Over the past few days, Ruin had checked everyone in the academy, and other than him, only Mikkel had high potential. The hero looked at Jason seriously and asked him to try a little harder to show a good result on the next test. Jason, in turn, asked if he was the same Ruin that his comrade had known before. A friend told me that recently there have been rumors about him that he will push out Mikkel and become not only the best student, but also the representative of the academy. Finally, the two boys decided to go back to the academy. In the 5th month of each year, representatives of the academies would gather together and determine the best among them by holding a festival. And once every 8 years an Olympiad was held, in which participants competed for the title of Best Magician. It was a national competition for the best students from the most famous academies. The winners received a huge cash prize and various privileges. There was also a limit on the number of participants. 1 student for individual competitions and 30 for group competitions. In the academy's cafeteria, everyone was thinking about who would be the representative at the festival this year. Jason assumed it would have to be Ruin. He was the only mage to get 100 points from Kingram. Another student said that Mikkel had finished last 4 times out of 5 in the past, so he couldn't be a representative. It was because of Mikkel that the team of boys was dubbed the Post Academy, that is, the Academy of Last Place. And the only way to get rid of this stigma was to send Ruin. The hero explained that the exam was not yet over. It was too early to be confident and expect anything. Ultimately, the participants of the Great Festival were chosen based on the results of the examination and the recommendations of the professors. The hero needed to focus on the next test. 4 days after completing the 3rd stage, Ruin received 1,000 strength, and the achievement of completing the preparation was received. The bear on this day also had to increase its strength. The difficulty of the repeatable level-up quest has been doubled, and the rewards have been tripled. The hero noticed how the bear grew in accordance with its level. At this time, in his office, Alec was thinking about how the battle with the ogre had earned Ruin extra points. He didn't know if Mikkel could win against him. Now, not only was Mikkel's participation in the festival at risk, but even his place as the best graduate. At that moment, the hero did not understand what had happened, because his strength indicators suddenly reached 1,200. The bear explained to Ruin that now he could become anyone. Now he could transform, although there were still some limitations. As a result, the bear turned into a scarecrow, although the hero expected something else. In the role of the scarecrow, he was supposed to act as an assistant in completing the task. The bear explained that since he was still weak, his level corresponded to that of a 3rd-class mage. The scarecrow offered him to turn into a demon, or a dragon, at the hero's request. The guy suggested starting training right now, and the bear's eyes sparkled with intrigue. He concentrated all his energy into his fist and prepared to attack Ruin. He in turn jumped back and thought that Mikkel was probably training now too. But he didn't guess. At that time, the blonde was in his uncle's office and discussing the hero. Mikkel believed that Alec had no right to be indignant. If rumors were to be believed, it was his uncle who had contributed to Ruin's high scores. The young man explained that it was Alec who suggested betting an ogre against the hero, which is why he scored so many points. The uncle was terribly angry with his nephew, believing that he was blackmailing him. He handed him a small bottle with some kind of plant and liquid. It was the awakening herb, the flaming flower, which is used to make elixirs. Uncle explained that if you drink this potion, you can get the awakening effect, which will significantly reduce the time it takes to cast spells. Mikkel noted that this was a risky undertaking, because Professor Heidel knew very well what the blonde was capable of. But instead of answering, the uncle handed over another potion and explained that if they were taken together, it would hide the fact that the elixir had been taken. He asked his nephew not to be afraid, because the Garikil family had always had this way of moving forward. Finally, the day of one-on-one combat arrived. The exam was held in the Mana Barrier Hall. Every year during these fights, the stands were completely filled. And finally, the time came for the final battle. In it, Ruin had to fight against Mikkel. The bear explained to the hero that the enemy knows that he will try to close the distance, so it might be difficult to fight. The hero smiled slyly. He assumed that if he still managed to get close, then one blow would be enough. Since this test was as close as possible to the conditions of a real battle, geographical objects were placed in the hall. Ruin noticed that Mikkel's condition was far from normal. With the help of the player's eye, he saw that the blonde man had a special hidden berserker state. He realized that Mikkel had taken something so that others would not discover that he had taken some kind of drug. There was a thorough drug screening before the exams, but Professor Ellick was responsible for that. At this time, the judge explained to the guys that they didn't need to worry about their opponent, because now they were in a hall where the effectiveness of magic was reduced by 99%. The hero asked the judge what would happen if it turned out that someone had taken the forbidden potion, at which point the blonde became scared. The judge explained that such violators would lose the right to take the exam and would fail, and would also be expelled. Ruin thought he would need to get some hard evidence that Mikkel had taken some kind of drug. When the start of the fight was announced, the guys rushed towards each other from different ends of the hall. Mikkel used restraining shackles on the hero and was already flying from above to attack him. But the hero was not held back by the bonds, and all the stands were shocked by how quickly he managed to free himself. Ruin thought it was great. The Mana Barrier Hall reduced the power of mana, but it had no effect on his own power. Mikkel didn't stop at this point and furiously used his fire breath. But the hero used acceleration and dodged each of his attacks. He hid behind a rock and noted that Mikkel's potion had the effect of reducing the summoning time and increasing mana collection. Now he was sure that the blonde had drunk the flaming flower. Mikkel lost his sense of distinction between allies and enemies, and all pain receptors were suppressed. The hero paused for a moment and smiled. He told Mikkel that he was so confident because he accepted the flaming flower. The blonde was surprised. He realized that he had been exposed, but even taking the elixir did not prevent Ruin from defeating him. He took a running start and, with a refraction of time, ran towards Mikkel. The blonde realized he was too fast and tried to build an ice wall in front of him. The next moment, he had already directed a fire lizard at the hero, which rushed straight at him. Ruin used the earthquake and gathered all his energy into his fist. He used it on the ground, and from this both the lizard and the wall collapsed, and the hero himself approached Mikkel, who screamed in fear. The hero gathered his fingers to flick the blonde on the forehead, but at the last moment he directed energy there and flicked with special force. The guy flew back a few meters but was still conscious even after such a blow. At this rate, Mikkel could die from the accumulated wounds. Ruin summoned a binding tree, tied up the blonde and lifted him off the ground so that he couldn't escape. He called the judge to him and explained that Mikkel had used a prohibited drug, and the judge asked him to explain why he thought so. Ruin explained that the use was hidden by the person who conducts the testing before each match, and he hinted at Ellick. Because in the entire academy there was only one person who fit that description. Ellick rushed indignantly to the judge and Ruin. He did not understand the accusations that Mikkel had taken the drug and the professor had allegedly hidden it. Ruin smiled and said he could prove it right now. Ellick suggested doing the drug test again, but the hero explained that it was useless since the professor gave him a concealing elixir. At that moment, the hero approached the tree and using force almost completely tore it down. He explained that he had flicked Mikkel's forehead with such force, and he still remained conscious and laughing after that. In his current state, the blonde had at least a concussion and 4 broken ribs, but he was laughing. At that moment, the head of the academy called out to Professor Ellick in a menacing voice. He did not understand how the professor dared to do such a thing on the sacred territory of the exam, and asked him to go to his office. The events of the 4th stage swept through the academy like a storm. The Garachil family's manipulations came to light. At this time, the hero acquired a new nickname. Now he was called the Exorcist of the Magicians. Ruin. He was also summoned to the head of the academy. When the boy entered the gate, he saw a green meadow and Theron's throne, on which the king of magicians sat. The head of the academy quietly approached him and asked what the guy saw here. As they walked, the elder explained that the appearance of this place was created with the help of Malarok's eye. This name belonged to the leader of the demons that invaded the continent of Frelia. He made the target see what they desired most. The head explained that the images around the hero were close to what he wanted to see. The hero thought that he wanted to see the Ardell family flourish and become the best magician. Ruin asked what the leader saw, and he said that he saw a world in which students behaved like students, and mages behaved like mages. As they were leaving this place for the office, the hero looked back and saw his comrades tossing him up and praising him for his victory. The chief treated Ruin to a cup of coffee and watched him closely. He folded his arms and asked how the hero knew that Mikkel had used the flaming flower. The guy replied that the blonde was not acting like he usually did, and he immediately thought of the flaming flower because of his aggressive and anxious behavior. The head explained that the hero not only assumed that Mikkel had used the flower, but was 100% sure of it. Ruin decided not to tell the whole truth and explained that he used physical force, not magic. Even if Mikkel was in a state of shock, his laughter despite the injuries he had received could only be explained by the consumption of the flower. The chief thought that at 16, the boy was perceptive enough to instantly notice subtle changes. He expressed his deep regret for what had happened and promised to personally ensure that the Garrickhill family did not harm the hero. The leader also invited Ruin to participate in the Great Festival as a representative of their academy. The hero was surprised. The representative of the academy at the festival is a status that everyone dreams of. Ruin explained to the leader that he lacked experience, as he had not participated in real battles in the past 5 years. However, the leader believed that Ruin was more than worthy of being considered a candidate for victory. Ruin became embarrassed, and the leader continued that the guy would become a secret weapon that appeared out of nowhere. The hero smiled. He realized that because he had always been last in the past, no one paid attention to him. But now everything had changed. The leader explained that it would be more beneficial for Ruin to attend body arts classes, so he invited a martial arts professor. The boy recognized the man as Golter Pyrant, one of the 5 knights of the 6th rank and the only one in the kingdom of Radian. It was with him that the hero crossed paths at the 3rd stage of the practical exam. The boy could not have imagined that he would have the opportunity to receive instructions from him. The knight said that last time the guy's attacks were good, clear, and without unnecessary movements. However, it was too obvious that Ruin hadn't studied martial arts for many years, which made the boy a little upset. Pyrant explained that the hero's skills might work against the ogre, but a skilled knight could read him like an open book. Ruin knew he was right. His movements were the result of repeating the same blows as part of the mission. The knight enthusiastically suggested that he start training right away. Perante said that the most important thing for a knight is his legs. They give strength to the sword and allow him to guess the enemy's actions. Also, the training center usually taught celestial martial arts. One day, the hero stated that his training would not benefit the knight, but the knight explained that it was a worthwhile investment. The knight thought that Ruin was doing well. The guy was not lacking in endurance. The melee mage was physically stronger than the ogre, so the young man seemed extremely interesting to Pyrant. 3 weeks passed like this, and the bear reported that due to the effect of mastering the heavenly martial art, he had advanced to the 3rd rank. He admitted that Ruin was getting stronger surprisingly quickly, while Draca had not gained strength as quickly in his time. At this time, a breathless Jason ran up to the hero and asked if the hero had seen the stand yet. At the entrance ceremony, Ruin introduced the new students and stood on stage, causing everyone to envy him. Justifying their secret hopes all these years, the hero showed himself only from the pitiful side. He could only watch from afar as Mikkel received all the credit. Now, running up to the stand, Ruin saw that he had become a representative of their academy. Other students rushed to him with congratulations, joyfully saying that they would perform at the festival on his behalf. It took the hero a long time, but he became a representative of the academy again. Sometime later, the professor told the hero that he was surprised to learn from Sir Golter that the boy had mastered martial arts. The preparations for the great festival went smoothly, after which the students went to the festival site. A group of guys from the same academy approached the surprised students and told them not to embarrass themselves with their surprise at the magic train. It was Henkies, Mikkel's backup singer, who had taken part in the magic festival with him last year. He urged the students not to expect Ruin to perform a miracle at this festival. One of Henki's comrades stood nearby and nodded in agreement, believing that they would have had a better chance if Mikkel had been chosen as their representative. The hero thought that many people were trying to gain an advantage by somehow currying favor with the Garikil family. The hero smiled and said out loud that Mikul's dogs remained loyal even when their owner was kicked out of the academy. He explained that this festival would be a level above the rest, so winning would give you better opportunities than with the Garikil family. Hankies shouted that this would only happen if they won, but that was impossible. The hero explained that cooperation plays an important role at the festival, so it is better not to use those who interfere with teamwork. Hankas suggested that in that case the hero would compete without them. Ruin suggested that they think about it while they were riding the train, because there were no Garikils here to judge their loyalty. When the students were riding on the train, they happily looked around and were surprised at how fast it was. The bear at this time also happily admitted that the world had become a great place. In his time, there were no such fast trains. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice was heard at the door and three guys in different uniforms mockingly greeted the Post Academy. The symbol on the uniform was from the National Magic Institute, the only educational institution in the Desert Kingdom. The gang leader was looking for Mikul and hoped that he had not escaped. The bear giggled on the hero's shoulder. He didn't understand how he remained so calm in such a situation. Ruin didn't participate in such events, so he didn't even realize that the guys from the academy were being so openly insulted. The professor was reading a book at the time and had no intention of interceding. At the moment, he was acting as an ordinary escort. Now the power and responsibility for the team was in the hands of the hero as a representative of the academy. At this time, the thug approached Henkus and asked where Mikul was hiding. At this point, the hero stood up and explained that Mikul was most likely lying in bed now, praying that his ribs would heal properly. The leader was surprised by such courage. He approached Ruin and asked his name. The hero introduced himself and asked him to get out of their carriage. Before that, he also wanted the leader to apologize for all the insults he had voiced in a polite manner. The leader clearly did not expect this and shouted towards Henkus that he should have told his new representative about him. Apparently, the students who participated in the magic festival were trembling in the presence of those students, all because they were under attack by Set Malkiri, whose plans were to crush the morale of his opponents even before the battle. The hero smiled and suggested that they sort things out on the spot. Malkiri was clearly surprised by such a proposal. As soon as he swung his fists towards the ruins, a teacher from another institute ran in and asked him to stop. He asked him to sit down and calm down and not to make enemies for himself from the very beginning. The teacher also apologized to the professor for the behavior of his students. Before leaving, Malkiri turned towards the hero and explained that he would deal with him later. In another carriage, the teacher turned to the leader and asked if he had noticed anything. He explained that Professor Heidel sat and smirked as he watched them, as if he was just waiting for a fight to start. The teacher believed that Ruin definitely had something that they didn't know about. After a short showdown with another institute, the atmosphere in the carriage changed. The students discussed the first match, which was a group competition without a representative. Henkus explained that they had to win because they could not lose to another institution. The hero smiled. From a certain moment, these guys, filled with envy and selfishness, began to unite. Ruin stood up and explained that the guys from the other institute did not respect the representative and did not hide it at all. The guy said that if he had kept quiet, they would have fully justified the mocking nickname. One of the students suggested putting Henkus in goal in an airball match, and Henkus became embarrassed by this. Apparently, Mikul's supporters also decided to side with Ruin. The next stop was the Duchy of Altain. The professor announced for the students to grab their things and head for the exit. It was a state that was part of the Imperial Federation of Rheinach, a land where students had to put aside their emotions, even if they had been bitter enemies for decades. If bloodshed occurs on the territory of Altain, the Empire of Rheinach, represented by the ruler of the continent, will hold a trial of the criminals. Due to this state of affairs, the competition was held in Altain. A lot of people from different academies and institutes had already gathered in the square. Jason admitted that everything was completely different here. He came from a fairly wealthy region, but this place was nothing to compare to. As one would expect from the capital of a kingdom, there was an air of noble antiquity everywhere, and the inhabitants strolled carefree through the streets. Now they were heading in carriages to their temporary place of residence. The professor hoped that none of their students would visit participants from other educational institutions, even by mistake. The bear jumped onto the hero's knee and sniffed. He smelled some strange aroma. It was as if there was a relic of Drac nearby. The next day, before the students had even fully woken up, the hero was already getting ready to leave the Ignite Academy premises. He ran through the streets, and the bear directed him in the right direction using the mini-map. Finally, Ruin ran to the workshop and looked inside. He believed that the item that the black dragon used would be in a more unusual place. The hero imagined that he would end up in a black market or a rich man's warehouse. The guy turned on the player's eye and saw a glowing object surrounded by energy and walked towards it. The object turned out to be a ring that could resist the touch of a friend or the embrace of a loved one. The bear explained that the effect may not activate when it is really needed, but may work on something ordinary, and then there will be a failure. Ruin tried on the ring and thought that it fit like a glove, as if it had been made especially for him. The guy asked the seller how much the ring cost, and he offered to take it for free. The hero promised the old man to buy something else in his store, and with the help of the eye saw a book of quantum mechanisms of magic and a sword. As soon as he put his hand on the book, a girl jumped up to him and put her hand on top of his. It was Irene Prius from Seika Women's University. There was a foul king, also known as the King of Magicians and the King of the Border, Theron Artemis. He chose 11 mages to represent the next generation, and she was one of them. The hero heard that she was a genius, close to reaching the 5th class. But she was already a 5th class mage. It seemed like the rumors were lagging behind. The girl asked him to give her the book, since he had already found what he wanted, and now he decided to find something else. She became embarrassed and explained that it was part of her individual assignment. She asked not to ask her about it. Ruin thought that it was unlikely that she was looking for this book for the educational institution. Maybe it was an order from the Dirty King. When the hero came back into the room and told about the meeting, Jason and Henkes immediately flew to him. Henkes said that despite the fact that the girl is strong, she always takes second place and is terribly worried about losses. He exhaled and said that Doom Prime had always held first place, and therefore, he was the most recognized mage among all his peers on the continent. However, it's not that cool to be a magic swordsman. A magic sword doesn't give a noticeable increase in magic compared to other weapons. Jason explained that he had an artifact, good sword skills, and a talent for magic. The hero thought. Irene Prius mastered 5th grade magic at the age of 16, and the magical swordsman Doom Prime, who defeats Iris every year. If Ruin were to fight against these famous geniuses, he didn't know if he could defeat them. Suddenly the door opened and one of the students announced that it was time for the first group to gather outside. When the guys got outside, it was announced that the first opponent of the other institute would be the Post Academy. Malkyrie appeared on the horizon, happy to have such weak opponents. The hero thought that these were the worst opponents for them. These guys were famous for their dirty play. And besides that, many in their academy were traumatized by interactions with them. The students from the other institute laughed, thinking that the students from the academy were so weak that they wouldn't even let them warm up. But these words didn't touch Ruin at all. He believed that they themselves were no longer the same as before. He approached the students of another institute and said that besides them, many other participants in the great festival had gathered. The hero greeted everyone present and explained that he was a representative of the Post Academy that was being discussed here. Ruin suggested that they stop calling them Post Academy because it was unpleasant. He explained that he wanted to try to get to the first place. Malkyrie frowned. He didn't understand who the hero was to make such a statement and expect to take first place. A little later, the students of the institute discussed who Ruin was. They found out that he had failed at everything before. One of the students told how at the beginning of the semester, the hero changed dramatically and became a monster with amazing results. Malkyrie stood up from the couch and stretched. He wanted to teach the academy a good lesson so that they would definitely not win. Meanwhile, in the academy house, they were discussing the throwing of the mana grenade, a competition in which everyone except the representative took part. The idea was to throw grenades filled with mana at a mithril golem. The team that destroys their golem faster wins. The hero agreed that compared to another institute, they lacked talented students. He explained that this was a group competition and if they worked together, they could win. The first group was supposed to heat up the mana grenades, the second was supposed to move them, and the third team would attack the golem. And a fourth team was also needed, which would restore the enemy golem. Ruin declared that now they would not be the last but the first. This was his sincere intention. The guy explained that while the students from the other institute would throw one grenade, they would throw 2 or 3 at once. All the boys admitted that they trusted Ruin and would follow his instructions. He divided the boys into groups based on their strengths, and the hero's ability was behind this choice. With the help of the player's eye, the hero saw the essence of the target. He was able to minimize weaknesses and focus on the strengths of the group. Once everyone got into the perfect group, even the guys who doubted the hero began to warm up to him. The team members became more confident, and hope began to shine in the guys. At that moment, a crippled young man burst into the house and fell to his knees. Ruin jumped up to the guy and asked what happened. He said that another institute was to blame for everything. The hero was angered by this information. The student said that a representative of other students brought his guys with him and beat him up. Ruin could not stay any longer in the building and went to the house of the students of another institute. Malkiri chuckled and told the rest of the students that he knew Ruin would come to him. He called Malkiri to come out and beckoned him with his hand. Malkiri asked the hero why he was acting so impudently, and Ruin put his hand on his shoulder. After this, the hero squeezed the shoulder so hard that Malkiri fell to his knees. The leader wanted to throw his fist at the hero and swung. But the guy with an impassive face twisted Malkiri's arm, not letting him hit even once. Ruin offered the leader to make a bet with him. When the hero returned home, he told the other students that if Malkiri lost, he would get a slap on the forehead from him. At this time, the Festival of Magicians began. Historical magicians who somehow stood out within the framework of the festival. They became important people, writing their names in the history of the continent. The hero raised his head proudly and realized that she had become part of the festival where legends are created. The host shouted that the opening ceremony was over, and all participants should return to their seats. A Malkiri appeared on the horizon and explained to the hero that this time he would defeat him and would not let down his guard. Also among the participants was Doom Prime, the winner of the festival and the man who stands at the top in each discipline. Ruin saw Irene Prius, who entered the arch as one of the participants. The girl told him how she heard that he even went into open conflict by visiting the house of another institute. The hero didn't know how she knew about this, but she said that Altan was a small town and everyone already knew about it. Since he let her take one book she was looking for, the girl decided to give him advice not to stand out. Ruin asked if he should hide his skills as she did, and the girl was surprised by his prophecy. The academy team moved towards the arena. Jason tried to maintain team spirit and said that they would show everyone yet. The first competition finally started and people were in confusion. Because previously, in team competitions, those who had outstanding people won. But now there was a division into groups at the academy. The audience recognized them as the very ones who behaved as if they would really be the first. They turned their attention to the Ignite Academy Golem, who had already lost one arm. Ruin shouted at them about how well they were doing and tried in every way to support his allies on the battlefield. At this time, Malkiri was yelling at his team and did not understand what they were doing. He was not happy with the fact that they were losing after the academy. The reason why the academy beat the institute was purely strategic. However, this approach would only work if there was a clear understanding of each person's strengths. Irene thought that the hero not only easily found the book she had been looking for a long time, but also divided the children into groups according to their skills. She didn't understand what kind of person he was, and how it happened that she had never seen him at any competition before. At that moment, Jason sent out one last energy ball and destroyed the golem completely. The boys rushed at each other with excited cries, shouting that they had won. After the competition, the students rushed to Ruin and hugged him from all sides because it was announced that they had won the first stage. In the second stage, the students were already seeing off Ruin and wishing him victory over Malkiri. After the last victory, people showed interest in the academy again, but this was not enough to remove the label. The hero realized that they needed an overwhelming victory, and if they achieved it after graduation, everyone would look at them differently. They also had to show themselves to the King of Magicians. At this time, the dirty King Theron watched from his chair what was happening in the arena. He remembered Ruin and explained that he had previously considered him as a candidate to represent the next generation. He had a habit of remembering talented guys. The king said that this guy was born with such a huge talent that he could instinctively learn magic even in childhood. The chief said that it was the king who considered him useless all this time. At this time, the bear asked Ruin if he was going to call on a protector. He advised him to come closer. The hero stretched his arms and explained that he would fight head-on. When the match started, the guy rushed towards Malkiri at full speed. When Ruin was ready to fly up to the leader, he called for help from a combat defender. The defender rushed towards the hero, but he managed to jump back, and with the skill of fast movement rushed towards Malkiri. Everything happened so quickly that the leader didn't have time to really react. He swung his fist, but the hero caught it. In doing so, Malkiri did not take into account that the defender was at this time moving towards them, preparing to attack. The boy realized that he was finished when his own defender's spear was aimed at his head. But at that moment, Ruin jumped up and repelled the defender's attack, breaking through his armor. Finally, everything was over, and the summoned knight fell without having time to kill anyone. The hero prepared his signature flick and hit Malkiri on the forehead with it. With such a simple click, the leader flew back several meters and fell to the ground. The students of the academy could not hide their delight at this exciting spectacle and victory. At this time, the king was surprised. He was the only 8th class mage, but even he had never heard of such magic. The filthy king looked angrily at the sphere and wondered what Ruin Ardal was. The king asked the old man to tell him everything he knew about this guy. The leader said that he was a model student who should have given up but fought to the end. The king was dissatisfied with this answer and suggested that what would happen if he called Ruin and asked him directly himself. The king thought that he and no one else should stand at the pinnacle of magic, and he wanted to do everything to learn about this magic he had seen for the first time. A little later in the tavern, the guys were sitting happily at the table. They were eating and drinking various drinks. There was already a local coconut vanilla drink and a dragon's kiss on the table. Jason sat down at the table with Ruin and suggested that he try the kiss of a dragon from his homeland. But before the guys had time to drink, Malkiri also approached the table and stopped behind the guys. The hero looked at him angrily and did not understand what had brought him here. Did he really want to quarrel again? But Malkiri publicly apologized. He was sorry that all this time he looked down on the students of the academy. He admitted that there are many strong guys in this world, so for someone he is also weak. Some of the students even felt a bit awkward because Malkiri suddenly began to repent. As soon as he was about to leave, the hero called out to him and asked whether he said this because of a bet or because of real feelings. When Malkiri said that he wanted to ask for forgiveness himself and not because of the bet, Ruin extended his hand and thanked him. Thus, they shook hands and ended their feud. At some point, the guys started celebrating together. Hanging their arms over each other's shoulders, they drank the dragon's kiss. When Ruin opened his eyes in the morning, he saw 3 male faces leaning over him. The guys cheerfully told about how yesterday the hero, while drunk, almost cried his eyes out with gratitude for believing in him. They laughed because they couldn't even imagine that the seemingly perfect Ruin had such a side. As the hero walked down the corridor, Malkiri waved to him joyfully and asked if he had slept well. The hero immediately remembered that even yesterday they called each other brothers. The hero turned around and blushed, and Malkiri called him his friend and wished him a quick meeting. After that, Ruin was immediately called out by Teacher Heidel, and the boy thought that everyone already knew about yesterday. But the professor explained to him that someone wanted to see him, and the chief became wary because this man was dangerous. Heidel told him that this man was the dirty King Theron, and the hero was unpleasantly surprised by this news. The professor explained that people who hide their true nature, like the dirty king, are dangerous. When Ruin returned to the room, he told the boys that the king himself was watching them, which meant that this was another reason for victory. Arrow ball is a game in which the ball is a living arrow that constantly flies across the field. 9 participants are divided into teams of forwards, defenders, and a goalkeeper, and those who score the most goals win. Despite the simple rules, the game required the development of complex strategies and tactics, when it was necessary to use protective spells, and when it was necessary to use crowd control magic. How to catch the ball arrow and direct it into the goal and so on, many aspects had to be taken into account. When the match started, the hero was already running on the offensive. The enemy team tried to use Ice Tree and Ice Spear to stop him, but the hero easily tore and smashed all the barriers and moved closer to the enemies. At this time, Malkiri was shouting in support of Ruin, and his team thought that he had gone crazy after losing to him. Malkiri himself thought that after their match he was convinced that Ruin would be the next generation mage. Irene, Dalian, and Doom were strong. He knew this because he had competed with them before at the festival. But Ruin was stronger than each of them. It wasn't just about strength. He had leadership skills and was capable of reconciliation, and the Malkiri was proud to have become his friend. At this time, the opponents did everything possible to stop Ruin. They built walls of ice, but he broke them with ease. Suddenly, Jason jumped out of nowhere with an arrow in his hands and made it clear that in addition to the hero, they also needed to fear him. The opponents realized that he had grabbed the arrow ball and wanted to stop him, but the defenders had already lost. Even after several goals, the opposing team focused all their efforts on Ruin, and Jason and the other team members successfully took advantage of the opening. When the enemy's attention waned and they were unable to stop their team, their defensive formation would immediately collapse. Arrow ball is usually a 3 or 4 point game, but the Academy won by a staggering 11 points. When the whole team was rejoicing in the victory in the library, someone called Ruin. Professor Heidel approached him and put his hand on his shoulder, saying that the meeting with the king would take place at 7 in the evening. Sometime later, Ruin met with the leader and together they headed to the king. The king sat alone in the huge throne room and was clearly already tired of waiting for guests. The boy thought that he was a magician standing on the border between a man and a demigod. They sat down at the table and the king admitted that he had once had occasion to observe the boy. The hero exchanged glances with the old man, and the king continued that back then Ruin was one of the candidates. But now it was as if he was a different person. The boy realized that his current self was like an eyesore, living proof that the border mage had not been perceptive enough. The hero explained to the king that even if words about talent might be an exaggeration, they could not negate his efforts. The king asked in a bored tone how it was that the teacher and student decided to speak in the same vein. He concluded that the boy had studied the art of the body to overcome his disorder and become as strong as an ogre. Although it was possible that the reason was some artifact, he had never heard of an item with such an effect. The king said he would watch to see if his efforts would help him stand firm, even against the children he had chosen. Ruin stood up, smiled, and explained that he too was interested in how different he was from the children chosen by the king of magicians himself. A little later, when the king and the chief were sitting alone, he explained that there was no need to worry, and he was glad to have talented magicians. The chief asked if the king had been able to satisfy his curiosity. The king took a sip of coffee and admitted that no, because they had never told him what they were hiding. He asked the chief if he had heard how this impudent guy decided to warn him, and the chief asked him not to be so strict with him, because he was still young. The king remembered that Ruin was not afraid of him at all. Most others would already be begging and crawling on their knees. The king would like those he raises to also become at least a little interesting. At this time, the whole team tried to support Doom, but he thought that this support was pointless. Suddenly, one of his team ran into the room and whispered information in his ear. He told how Ruin was summoned by the king himself and how he and the leader went to him. Dum clenched his fists. He couldn't believe how the dirty king was dating anyone other than him. He saw some of the matches he played. This man turned everyone upside down. But he did not pay attention to him because, despite all his hardships, he did not see him as his rival. Doom thought he might only arouse curiosity due to his unusual approach to witchcraft. His thoughts were so overwhelming that Doom couldn't help but punch the wall so hard that his team turned around. In a furious gaze, Doom decided that he could never forgive Ruin, because only he was worthy of the recognition of the King of Magicians, so the battle between them would be deadly.